Now on the phone is Miranda Devine. She's a columnist for the New York Post, and she has a brand new book out today. It's called The Big Guy, How a President and His Son Sold Out America. Miranda, great to have you back with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Vince. It's great to be with you.
And congratulations on yet another sure-to-be very successful book. Tell us about this.
Thank you. Well, it's really the sequel to The Laptop from Hell, which was all about Biden family corruption that we found in the laptop and from some whistleblowers. But as as the years have gone by, the biggest story turned out to be the cover-up, and that's what The Big Guy is about. It's basically the story of how the FBI, the CIA, the State Department, the Department of Justice, the IRS, all conspired to protect Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden, who was a crack addict, and also Joe Biden's younger brother Jim Biden, who was involved in this family influence peddling business, to protect them from the consequences of their greed and their recklessness.
Yes, and that saga continues, although it's even more out of sight now. Because Joe Biden has been replaced by Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. But Hunter Biden's legal troubles continue. It was just recently he was filing this guilty plea in California for his tax violations. What do you make of that saga and the way it's going?
Well, it hasn't finished because the very people who covered up for Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and Jim Biden are the very people who are now protecting Kamala Harris and who have elevated her to this status and who we just saw this week, you just mentioned it, the 741 senior officials from the national security community who signed that letter endorsing Kamala Harris as, believe it or not, the most serious and most capable candidate to be commander-in-chief. And these are the same people that propped up Joe Biden, that protected his son Hunter when he was ricocheting around the world, taking in millions of dollars from, shady oligarchs and CCP military officials, and while he was on crack. You have 9 of those 741 officials that signed that Kamala Harris letter also signed what I call the Dirty 51 letter, which was the letter published before the 2020 election in response to our stories about the laptop, pretending that the laptop was Russian disinformation. And that letter, as I reveal in the book, turned out to be not just a letter written and signed by 51 former intelligence officials, including 5 former acting directors or directors of the CIA. It was instigated by Antony Blinken, now Secretary of State, then a senior official in the Biden campaign. And it was written by Mike Morell, former acting director of the CIA. And it was signed off on by then CIA Director Gina Haspel under Donald Trump. She signed off on that letter. It was so political that it was sent upstairs to her desk through a few hands, and she approved it for publication, even though they all knew it was not Russian disinformation. They knew that the laptop was real. The FBI had it in their possession for 10 months by that stage, and very shortly they had figured out, yes, it was Hunter Biden's. No, it had not ever been tampered with. Nothing had been added to it or subtracted from it, and it was fit to use in a court of law, which is exactly what happened in June with Hunter Biden's gun felony charge in Delaware, and as you just mentioned, in California with his tax trial where he pleaded guilty on day one.
One of the common elements, in addition to the signatories between these various letters endorsing Democrats and attacking Trump, is that it all, now that we've seen this story 1,000 times, many versions of it covered by you, it's all just a racket. It's all just a racket to protect very corrupt schemes. The second I saw this letter come out this week from 700 national security people, a bunch of generals, I thought, my first thought was not, what's the virtue by which they're making this claim? My first thought was, what defense contractors do all these guys work for? What consultancies? What consultancies do they work for? What jobs are they hoping for in a Biden and now a Harris administration? I mean, because all I see is people trying to line their pockets and doing it at the expense of the rest of us.
Yes, and what is the industry that they're in that lines their pockets? It's the war industry. And this is why they despise Donald Trump and they portray him as an existential threat. And he is an existential threat, not to America, not to democracy. He's an existential threat to them and their power. These deep state actors, the blob, as the Obama people used to call them, which is that triumvirate of the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon. Donald Trump is an existential threat to them because he's a practical man. He's a property developer from Queens. He treats all problems in his presidency from first principles in a logical fashion, including the foreign relations problems. And there were many when he came into office. And by the time he finished, he had sorted things out so that we had Vladimir Putin never invaded anywhere when Donald Trump was president. The Middle East was calm because of the Abraham Accords. ISIS was kaput. We had Iran on its knees, completely broke, unable to fund these proxy attacks on Israel. Everything was calm. And then, of course, Biden gets in and he is a puppet of the blob. He is their creature. And so they love him and they reactivated their crazy agenda. And what they hate is that Donald Trump is no one's puppet. He's completely uncontrollable. He is not following their agenda. He follows his own agenda, and that is why he was good for America.
And it's crazy. I mean, in a bunch of ways, it's crazy. If it's just a profit motive, I mean, one thing to remember, Trump's not a pacifist. He's a big believer in peace through strength. He wants to grow the military. He wants to have the weapon stockpiles necessary to defend this country. He only wants to prosecute wars that are directly in the American interest. He's not some peacenik. He's not a guy who's saying there's never any circumstance to go to war. He's the guy who hit Qasem Soleimani. I mean, there's clearly, in other words, like there's a friend to the military in Donald Trump. And the other piece is like, how could you sign a letter, call yourself a general officer, and then sign a letter that to support the woman who's overseeing the administration that has led to the biggest troop recruitment problems this century in the American military, the lowest morale in the American military, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, the forced jabs, the firings of chaplains who raised religious objections over those forced jabs. How in the world can you, with a straight face, say this woman is better than Donald Trump to be commander-in-chief?
Because they are the generals that are responsible for those debacles. They're the generals that have brought in the woke virus into the military. Look at General Milley and remember his testimony about white rage, his sabotage of his commanding officer, of the commander-in-chief, Donald Trump, when he was president. These generals are political animals, and they make lots of money coming in and out of government and military jobs from the military-industrial complex, obviously. And, it sounds paranoid to talk like that, but I think we've seen enough evidence just in the Trump and Biden era to bolster it and to make you understand what the stakes are and how corrupt these people are. Of course they are supporting Kamala Harris because she is more of the same. It's no surprise that during her endorsement speech at the DNC, when she accepted the nomination in Chicago a few weeks ago, that she emphasized, a brutal military. She was endorsed by Dick Cheney. That is who she is, because that's not really, she's not a military person. She's a far left radical, but to get the job, to stay in the job, she knows that she has to be a creature of the blob. And she'll be anyone's creature to get power, and that's what she's doing, just like Joe Biden did before her. And her running mate, Tim Walz, is a chip off the old block with Biden because he's also a creature of the CCP. He was captured by the Chinese Communist Party early on when he was a young teacher. He's been back every year for 30 years. His wedding anniversary, he got married on the anniversary of Tiananmen Square massacre. He came back from China telling his pupils how brilliant China was, and there was no crime. Of course, there isn't in an authoritarian society. And he was just like Joe Biden when he had his first, as a young senator, his first trip to China. He was wined and dined and duchessed by the senior level of the CCP, taken to an island like Martha's Vineyard, came back and was so embarrassingly lavish in his praise of China that the Weekly Standard at the time put him on the front page. I think it was the front cover, just mocking him mercilessly.
Yeah. By the way, the fact that he got married on when I first heard that Tim Walz got married on the anniversary of Tiananmen Square.
How sick is that?
I was I thought in his defense for a half second I was like, well, maybe it's a coincidence. It turns out it wasn't even a coincidence. He did it on purpose. No. He said he wanted a quote date he'll always remember. How demented is that?
So would all the victims of the massacre remember it and their families. I mean, it would be like, someone getting married on 9/11.
Yeah.
Like, it's just so twisted. And in fact, it wouldn't even be like an American. It'd be like, a Saudi or one of the hijackers' nationalities getting married then. It's just very callous and lacking empathy, I think. It's really bizarre.
It's so crazy. Hey, so on back to the Biden family for a moment. Hunter Biden, the White House and Karine Jean-Pierre, who, by the way, has never lied to us. I just want to be really clear. They keep claiming that Joe Biden is not going to pardon Hunter. He's not going to commute any sentence. He's going to stay out of this completely. Do you buy that? And when do you think the commutation or pardon are coming?
No, of course I don't buy it. I mean, it's not as if Joe Biden hasn't been loose with the truth in his past. I mean, that's what he's known for. He's probably the biggest liar that's ever graced the Oval Office, I would say. I would say he'll probably do it after the election in that sort of lame duck period, and he'll have an excuse, and the media will excuse him and say, oh, well, he's a poor man, he's an elderly man with a fading memory, and he's had so much tragedy in his life, and, how can you begrudge a man for protecting his only son? And, anyone who objects will be just cast as a callous, mean person. But that's not, when he says, I give you my word as a Biden, you can take it to the bank that he's lying.
By the way, I'm really looking forward to his excuse for the pardon. It's going to be something like, Hunter is being unfairly persecuted because he's my son. It's going to be so pitch perfect because, meanwhile, he's the guy who's been constantly trying to imprison his own political opponent for purely sick, callous political reasons. And the media will just nod along, the legacy press. But not you, Miranda Devine at the New York Post. Thank you very much. Great to talk to you as always.